Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. So excited for this 2024 NBA mock draft. We're about halfway through the NBA season, which means another NBA mock draft is warranted. We're right at a spot where we kind of have a better sense of who some of these NBA teams are. Now we still have the end of the season ahead of us, we have the playoffs ahead of us. A lot can change from now to the NBA draft. But I think there's going to be a lot of great discussion in this video. It's going to be over an hour long, like all of the mock drafts here on the channel. So if you guys do enjoy the hard work and the content, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more NBA draft content as well. There's going to be player profiles and a bunch of other stuff coming out on the channel about all of these wonderful young prospects and players. And there's a lot to break down in this draft class, so I don't want to waste too much more time. One thing I do want to say though, this is not a mock draft based on what I would do. This is a projection of what I would expect the teams to do and ultimately the order that I would expect the players to get drafted currently based on kind of what teams are where and obviously kind of assessing fit along the way as well. So one thing I have to say, have you ever thought that your GM has made a mistake, or have you ever disagreed with something your team decided to do? 100% you have. So if you disagree with one of my mock selections, it's not even necessarily that I agree that that's the right pick or the right player. It's more so that's what I would expect to happen based on the current stock of these players and also based on what I think these teams are going to value when it comes to the draft. Now, again, there's a lot that can change between now and then, so don't get too bent out of shape if you disagree with something. Let me know down in the comment section below why you do, because I do love reading those comments and hearing what you guys have to think, because that's the whole point of this community here on YouTube, is to have a collective talking place where we can discuss a lot of things. So let me know down in the comment section below. Without further ado, let's jump into it here with pick number 1. We have the Detroit Pistons, and with the Pistons having the worst record in the NBA the day I'm recording this, Sunday, January 7th, they have the number 1 pick. We did the draft order here based on reverse standings, of course, and the Pistons are at a weird spot because yes, having the number 1 pick is always a good thing. You'd rather have the number 1 pick than the number 2 pick, regardless of what year it is, because you get your selection of all of the prospects. That's a great thing to have. But this is a difficult year for the Pistons specifically because even though there are some talented players at the top of the draft, and I've discussed this in previous mocks, how I don't think it's as weak as other people think. Now, I don't think there's like a true, oh, this is a no-brainer, can't miss prospect. I think there's a lot of guys who are going to highly impact winning. For the Pistons, I don't know if that player is like super clear for them how they fit with their team, because you have Cade Cunningham, so does a guy like Nikola fit? The answer is probably not as well as you would like him to. You also have Jalen Duren. Do you need a guy like Alex Sarr? The question, or the answer to that question, is probably not. But the Pistons need still a lot of help. They could really use shooting, and honestly, trading this pick down and getting more future assets would probably be the best outcome for the Pistons, but we're not doing trades in this mock, of course, since it's not even the official order yet. So when we look at who's on the board, I think it's going to be the safest route here for the Pistons to take the following player. With the first overall pick in the 2024 NBA draft, I have the Pistons selecting Alex Sarr from the NBL, playing for the Perth Wildcats. And Alex Sarr's a real freakish athletic big, 7'1". He moves very well out in space, especially on the defensive end, and that's one of the things that really stands out to me when I evaluate him as a prospect, is the defensive end of the floor. Detroit specifically, playing with Monty Williams as their head coach, they don't really utilize a lot of help defense. So if you're looking at getting a freakish, athletic, long, lengthy big man, yes, his shot blocking, rim protection isn't maybe as useful as it would be for other teams, but his switchability, his ability to stay in front of a guy, especially on the perimeter, that fits really well next to Jalen Duren defensively, because now you can run 2 7-foot lineups. You can stagger some of your bigs. Obviously, Isaiah Stewart's already there as well. So the Pistons would then have a really well fleshed out front court trio between Stewart, Duren, and Sarr. And I like Sarr a lot for them. For that reason specifically, I think offensively he's still growing. He's flashed a lot of his game, though, that he currently possesses when it comes to hitting stride stop turnaround jump shots, stretching out to the three-point line a bit. He's a good play finisher right now. He's comfortable playing off the basketball, which I think complements Cade Cunningham mostly, but also Jaden Ivey to a certain extent. And I think for Detroit, again, this maybe isn't the home run slam dunk pick you want it to be for number 1 overall, and that's one of the downfalls of this 2024 draft. I'm not sitting here saying this is the strongest draft class of all time. I think there's a lot of great players in this draft. I think there's a lot of depth in this draft, but I don't think it's one that, if you're Detroit, you're getting all of your problems solved here by picking number 1 like the Cleveland Cavaliers did in 2003 when they got LeBron James, like the Spurs did getting Victor Wembanyama in 2023, how those players are going to be long-term franchise staples. I don't think Sarr necessarily does that here for you if you're Detroit, but he's a really good building block to add to your already good young existing core, even though you're not winning games as currently constituted. Moving on to pick number 2, we have the San Antonio Spurs here, and I just referenced their 2023 selection of Victor Wembanyama, and I just have to stop the video and pause real quick here and say, my goodness, is that guy good. I hope you guys got to see his TNT showdown with Giannis Antetokounmpo, and honestly, outside of just that game, he's impressed me in a lot of ways. I know the Spurs are losing a ton. I know right now there's a narrative going around that, oh, he's not really a winning player, he's not impacting winning. Yes, he is, okay? He's been fantastic. And I hope Spurs fans acknowledge that and realize that just as much as I do. There's a lot of other things around the Spurs right now in terms of their attention to detail, their willingness to involve him in the offense, their willingness to make the right play instead of the selfish play. There's a lot of things going on in San Antonio that is impacting their ability to win, outside of the fact that they're just young and not as talented as some of the other teams in the NBA, because the NBA is really competitive right now, which is totally okay. I think one thing we've seen, though, is they're really good when they have Tre Jones and Victor Wembanyama and Devin Vassell on the floor, and I think that's going to be a breeding grounds and a good reason why they're going to select the player I have mocked for them here, second overall, because when they have a good point guard on the floor who can play, make, and create for others, they are a good team. That is one thing that I think really stands out from this season. One thing that when I broke down the fit of Victor Wembanyama before the draft last year, that was one analysis point I had, is if they have a competent point guard, Victor Wembanyama is going to be the ultimate play finisher. And I think second overall, this guy fits in excellently here. I'm sure most Spurs fans know who I'm talking about. With the second overall pick, I have the San Antonio Spurs selecting Nikola Topic, who is now playing for Red Star in the EuroLeague. He actually just had a knee injury, so he's going to miss extended time here, but if you look at what he was doing in Mega Basket, he had 85 assists to, I believe, 35 turnovers, so over a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. If there is one flaw to point out, is he wasn't shooting the 3-ball very well. His efficiency was relatively low from behind the arc, but he is, I think, someone who is capable of running an NBA offense. And if you want to look at this entire draft class as a whole, who perhaps has the most offensive potential in this entire draft, and the answer to that is Nikola Topic. Given his size for a point guard at about 6'6", he's not as big as Luka Doncic. Now that's going to be the comparison for a lot of these European guards who come over and play at their own pace. They've always gotten compared to Luka Doncic, just like how a bunch of 7-foot stretch bigs got compared to Dirk Nowitzki for 20 years. Mavs players just draw a lot of comparisons when they're European, and Topic doesn't necessarily fit that Luka Doncic mold. I don't think he's as good of a shot creator, as good of a shot maker as Luka Doncic. He's not as strong or as big as Luka Doncic, and I don't necessarily know if he's as quick as Luka Doncic either, so you might be saying, oh my gosh, is he any good? Luka's great at a lot of things. Topic, I think, is going to end up being very good at a lot of things, and that's a pretty drastic difference between the two. But Topic, for me, is a guy who, if you look at his ability to actually make reads and understand a defense and manipulate the pick and roll, that's something he does very, very well. He's a phenomenal passer. If I had to give you my actual breakdown right now of who's the best in the class as a passer facilitator, Topic would be at the top of my list because of his ability to get to certain spots on the floor and just understand how a defensive shell coverage is going to try and play their pick and roll. Are they going to guard it with 3 guys? Are they going to guard it with 2 guys? Is he going to be able to fit a lob in over top, or does he have to throw it to the weak side corner? That's something that Topic, he makes those reads very, very quickly and precisely. Not only does he make those reads quickly and accurately, but he puts the ball where it needs to be most of the time, and because of that, there's a lot to work with. And if you're looking at maximizing Victor Wembanyama, who's already so good, a guy like Nikola Topic can go a long way in doing so. Moving on to pick number 3, we have the Washington Wizards now, and I think the Wizards are going to be a very interesting team to discuss, not just the rest of this year in this draft cycle, but for the next 2, 3, 4 draft cycles, because I do love the long-term direction of their franchise. After trading away Bradley Beal and Kristaps Porzingis this past offseason, I think that they're actually really well suited to finally become a mainstream player in the NBA at some point. Instead of being stuck in mediocrity under Ted Leonsis, they finally have a direction, and yes, they're going to be at the bottom for a little while here. Wizards fans, you have to have some patience. You guys are not going to be good until probably 2026 at the earliest, but when you guys start to get good again, it's going to be really exciting because you're going to be watching all of these young players grow and develop, and you're going to probably reach a ceiling that we haven't seen them reach in quite some time. Think back to some of those John Wall teams early in his career. I think the Wizards, with the current collection of assets that they have, when they hit their stride and hit their ceiling in a few years, they're going to be really dangerous because I like some of their current existing pieces. And pick 3 here, it's not a home run slam dunk pick. It's kind of a continuity piece for adding in more talent that fits. And it's another wing. The Wizards don't necessarily need more wings. They already have Denny Avdija on a nice contract. They have Kuzma extended. We'll see if he actually makes it past the trade deadline there in Washington or not. But then they also have Corey Kispert, and they drafted Bilal Coulibaly, of course, in the top 10 in the 2023 NBA draft. But at pick 3, I have them going with Zaccharie Risacher, the French prospect playing for JL Berg. He's really an intriguing prospect because he's got a lot of size and length. He stands at about 6'10", and guess what he's shooting from behind the arc this year? Roughly 47% from 3. He has a massive number of catch and shoot shots he's able to create off the dribble, and he's got some intriguing skill set pieces and qualities that you look at as a guy who can create downhill and as a scorer of the basketball inside the arc. Now, I think one of the concerns around him is he's not finishing those plays as consistently as you'd like to see, but there's flashes there. And really the big thing here for the Wizards is, okay, if this isn't going to be our home run build around pick, we have to get a player who's going to fit long term next to other guys, and I think Risacher fits that especially well, just given the fact that he's shooting the ball so well in a professional league right now, in a professional setting with, high consequences. If you're not playing well, you're going to lose your minutes. And I think Risacher, the one thing is he's not only had a good season, but he's been very efficient, productive, and he's maintained his minutes throughout the year because of that. And I think when you have a player who is probably forced into playing a little bit more of a mature game and more of a role player type game, I think that is good for them sometimes in adjusting to the NBA pretty quickly. Again, maybe Risacher doesn't have the ceiling of an Alex Sarr or Nikola Topic in this draft, but what I do think Risacher does is provide you a good base level floor of, hey, this guy's going to be able to stay on the court because of his shooting. He's got length and size. Maybe there's some defensive upside there as long as he kind of builds out his frame a little bit, gets a bit stronger, a little bit better at the point of attack, and obviously the foot speed is going to be a question for him as well. But I think offensively, there's things to work with, there's things to build upon. He's got length, size, shooting. That's a really great trio to start with when you're drafting a prospect in a class that there's a lot of questions right now. I think Risacher can be a player who fits in Washington, not only in the short term, but also just long term as they continue to flesh out other pieces in future drafts. In the 2025 draft, they'll be in the running for maybe a Cooper Flagg pick if they end up getting the first overall pick. But there's a lot of good young talent coming in future years. Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper, other examples of that right now, both currently playing high school basketball. They'll both be attending Rutgers next year for the Scarlet Knights. So there's a lot of exciting players coming out in future drafts as well. So Risacher, drafting a guy right now for Washington that fits those future players, makes just as much sense as it does drafting around their current roster as well. Pick number 4, we move on to the Charlotte Hornets here. And the Hornets are an interesting case study of draft picks because obviously Mitch Kupchak, when he's the one in the decision-making chair, he likes to go off of upside and workouts and talent. And that's a good thing to do. And obviously this past draft made a decision to go with Brandon Miller, and a lot of people presumed it was because of fit. The Hornets are still not good. They are the 4th worst team in the NBA currently. Now, a big part of that is LaMelo Ball has missed a duration of time. Terry Rozier stepped up in a big way. We'll see if Rozier gets rerouted somewhere. But the Hornets, who are perennially a lottery team seemingly, it's hard to find somebody who I think is going to just fully elevate this team into a playoff team. So I think, again, you go here based off of upside, you go here based off of skills and traits and projectable growth and development. And the player here for me, although he's been a little inconsistent this year, he's also had some awesome moments and awesome stretches as well, and that's Ron Holland from G League Ignite. 4th overall, I have the Hornets selecting him due to his ability to create shots off the bounce, his ability to attack downhill. He's really, really athletic as a player who I think is going to be able to put some rim pressure on next to LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller, which I think is very important for them. And Holland, sometimes he does settle for his jump shot a little bit too much. I do like seeing him get downhill. And I think one thing for Charlotte is with the Miles Bridges question, as he's an expiring contract this year, is there going to be an open spot in the wing? And if the answer to that is yes, then you look at your long-term wing trio, or wing duo, next to LaMelo Ball as Ron Holland and Brandon Miller. There's a ton of scoring there. There's some shot-making touch, and there's some interesting skill sets that I think work together relatively well. Now, defensively, you're still going to have a lot of questions. How much are they going to rely on Mark Williams to basically do everything for them on defense as an anchor, rim protector, and rebounder? That's going to be pretty tough. I think the Hornets still have quite a few things to figure out and make work in terms of being a really good competitive team. They're loaded with some young talent. They have a lot of pieces that I think could work and be productive in the NBA, but it's all about making them fit together, and obviously it's hard to gauge how good they are when LaMelo Ball's been missing time, but I think if you add Ron Holland in, you have at least a young piece that has some upside and can maybe grow into another all-star caliber player next to your existing young duo in Ball and Miller. Moving on to pick number 5, we have the Portland Trailblazers, and don't look now, but Scoot Henderson's been playing much better in his last 12 games or so, averaging roughly 15 points and 5 assists a night in that stretch. The three-point shooting still fluctuates up and down a bit, but he's been a little bit more efficient when it comes to finishing around the rim in this recent stretch, and I think really the big thing is we've seen him kind of mature as a point guard and be more comfortable with the ball in his hands, and like I said, young guards, smaller guards especially, the first year in the NBA is always up and down. You look at Darius Garland, among other young players, they just typically struggle the first year, and that's not a surprise. Like, most guys come in and they're just not ready to adjust to the NBA game, especially if they're going to be running an offense, and I think some of those positive steps forward from Scoot Henderson this past couple weeks and maybe even past month or so is a really good sign for what's to come there in Portland. I do think he's going to be a really great young player sooner than later, and I think the Blazers still made the right selection, 3rd overall, and I do still stand on the fact that I thought he was the second best prospect in his draft class. And here at pick number 5, the Blazers are going to look to supplement him and Shaedon Sharpe with a player that I just think fits Mike Schmidt's MO, and that is Cody Williams here out of Colorado. Cody Williams, not only does he have the swagger, not only does he have some interesting skills that you're looking for, but I think he's put them together a bit at Colorado, currently missing some time due to injury. But Williams has been very efficient in his short career so far as a Colorado Buffalo, and I think when you look at what he presents from a wing standpoint, obviously his brother's in the NBA having a great season for the Oklahoma City Thunder, that is one drawing point. Obviously, when you have brothers, typically their games tend to mirror each other just a little bit. Now, it doesn't mean he's going to be the duplicate of Jalen Williams. I'm not suggesting that at all, really. I think Williams is more of a wing here. Cody Williams, I'm saying, is more of a wing player, a little bit less comfortable with the ball in his hands as a decision maker. Part of that's going to come with maturity and age and development, though, and I think there's a lot of things that you can still kind of lean into with him. I think he's going to be a really good transition player early in his career. I think he's going to be very good at attacking advantage and just making the right play in advantage situations, whether that's a 3-on-2, a 2-on-1, a 4-on-3, whatever you have there, like working off of Scoot Henderson if he gets blitzed in the pick and roll, whatever it may be. I think Williams is an intuitive cutter, and I think he's going to make a lot of smart plays and a lot of right plays as he develops as well. So for Portland here, it's about drafting a guy that you think you can not only get in the building and develop, but also a guy who has some of those traits already built into him, a player who has flashed some of those things early in his college career, and I think Williams has done enough of that to garner some serious top 10 consideration. Obviously, I have him going 5th overall in this mock draft to the Portland Trailblazers, and I think it is pretty well warranted just given what we've seen from him, again, in a pretty short, small sample size, but given kind of my expectations for him coming in as a freshman, I looked at him as a likely lottery selection anyway, so moving him up to 5th overall was not that hard of a decision for me, especially given some of the kind of questions around some of the other players currently in this draft. Pick number 6, we move on to the Memphis Grizzlies, and they've been better since Ja Morant came back. Of course, that's a big reason why their offense looked a lot better. They've been able to score the basketball quite a bit more. They were really like dead last in the NBA in scoring before Ja Morant's return, and now here with Memphis at 6, I think if you look at their recent draft history, they haven't done a terrible job. In some areas they have, like when they traded up for Zaire Williams, and I just didn't understand that decision, to be honest with you, especially given the fact that I would have myself preferred drafting Trey Murphy, who actually ended up falling to the Pelicans, which is the team that traded with Memphis in that situation. I love Trey Murphy III coming out of Virginia, and I just didn't really understand some of the hype around Zaire Williams as much. Like, one thing's clear, the Grizzlies have been looking for really good wings. They've been looking for 3s and 4s who can fit next to Jaren and can fit next to Ja Morant, of course, and now fit around Desmond Bane as well. And they tried it with David Roddy. They tried it with Jake LaRavia. I wasn't a big fan of LaRavia myself. I do think David Roddy's a pretty solid NBA player, but I don't think he's a starting caliber NBA player if you're trying to win a championship. So I think for Memphis specifically, you're looking to, again, still upgrade in that kind of hybrid forward spot, a 3 or a 4, maybe a little bit of positional versatility. Can play him at the 4 sometimes, play him at the 3 sometimes. And this guy offers a lot of length and size at that position specifically, and a player who I thought could be a potential number 1 pick coming into this year's draft, Matas Buzelis from G League Ignite. Now, I don't think he's going to hold that number 1 consideration, especially with kind of the growth we've seen from Alex Sarr and Nikola and Zaccharie Risacher. This draft is mostly dominated by players playing overseas, but Matas Buzelis still has a ton of talent to work with. He attended Sunrise Christian in Wichita, Kansas in high school, and for the G League Ignite, he missed a good amount of the season to begin the year, but now that he's back, G League Ignite has been playing much better as a team. They've been a lot more competitive with him in the lineup. I think that's a testament to his connectivity as a player. I think that's a testament to his ability to cut, play out of the dunker spot, knock down shots. He can create off the dribble to a certain extent. Now, I don't want to get things misconstrued here, so listen to me very carefully. I'm not suggesting he's a point forward. I'm not suggesting he's a point guard or anything crazy like that. But he is a 6'10" player who can handle the basketball to a certain extent, and I think that's something that is very valuable. You're not going to run your offense solely through him. He's not a build-around transformational offensive player, but he gives you some unique versatility where if you're Memphis, maybe you can run a 4-5 pick and pop with Buzelis being the ball handler, Jaren Jackson Jr. being the screen setter, and maybe you do that 3 times a game. It's not super frequent, but it can happen, and I think it puts other teams' big men in pretty interesting defensive scenarios. Imagine you're going against the Minnesota Timberwolves, who, yes, they have Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert. Surprisingly, the Timberwolves don't want to switch that as much. Otherwise, then you're getting Gobert switched out onto Buzelis and Towns switched onto Jaren Jackson Jr. Gives you some unique versatility if you're Memphis and attacking certain teams that match up in certain ways against you. And against smaller teams, Buzelis is skilled enough to sit out of the dunker spot and operate off the catch down there. He can post up to a certain extent, although he hasn't done that a ton for G League Ignite. I think with his size and touch around the rim, that's something the Grizzlies would be able to lean into a little bit. And again, he's got passing vision, ability to handle the basketball to a certain extent. And I think because of that, this is the perfect fit for the Memphis Grizzlies 6th overall, and would be an absolute dream come true for them on draft night. Moving on to pick number 7, we are back to the San Antonio Spurs, and this pick is super important to talk about because 7th overall is actually the highest potential pick this could be for the Spurs on draft night. We already talked about their own selection, number 2 overall. This pick here at number 7 comes from the Toronto Raptors in the Jakob Poeltl trade, when the Raptors, kind of unknown to me why they did this, traded a top 6 protected 2024 first to the Spurs for Jakob Poeltl. And I know that doesn't sound too crazy. Jakob Poeltl's a starting center, okay? Listen, the Raptors have the 7th worst record in the NBA. I think right now with all of the moves that they're making, they recently traded OG Anunoby. They're clearly trying to stay competitive, and I don't really understand that as much. I think that the best case for them would be to bottom out for a year or two, supplement more young talent around Scotty Barnes, and build this thing up in a way that actually fits. Instead, they're just kind of putting pieces together and hoping that it works, like RJ Barrett. I just don't know exactly how he fits next to Scotty Barnes long term and Jakob Poeltl, and we'll see what happens with the Pascal Siakam trade. But for the Spurs here, you're just sitting there and smiling because you're getting a really nice asset here. And for the Spurs, we already drafted Nikola, so we addressed a playmaking point guard. What we need to do now is find a defensive-minded wing, and not only a defensive-minded wing, but a defensive playmaker, someone who I think can be a defensive stopper in the NBA, and that is Ryan Dunn from Virginia, 7th overall. The Spurs select Ryan Dunn out of Virginia. And listen, offensively, he's got a ways to go. He's not super comfortable with the ball in his hands. He's a bad three-point shooter. He's shooting sub 25% from 3 at the time I'm recording this video. But he does do some nice things offensively still as a cutter, as a play finisher around the rim. He is shooting over 57% on 2-pointers this year, which is super important to note. And again, like if you're the Spurs, you're trying to build your identity out here. And we got with Topic a player who's going to be able to facilitate, set up the table for Victor Wembanyama most specifically, but also for the other young talent like Vassell, Keldon Johnson. And now 7th overall, we're coming back and we're addressing the identity once again, but this time on the defensive side of the basketball, getting a player who you probably put on the other team's best player immediately, even as a rookie. He's got phenomenal size at about 6'9", with a ton of length. He's able to guard across multiple positions. He's super athletic. And oh, by the way, right now he's currently on pace to be the first player in NCAA history with over a 10% block rate and over a 5% steal rate. So he's just kind of a creative player on defense. Imagine you load up NBA 2K and you make a massive lockdown defender with 99 block, 99 steal. That's what you're looking like here with Ryan Dunn. It's a really unique prospect. Like, there are flaws to his game. There's a reason I'm not mocking him first, second, or third, or fourth, or fifth overall here. But at 7th overall, I think it's a worthwhile selection for San Antonio specifically, given that they have 2 top 7 picks. I think for Dunn, if you're looking for kind of a rough range for him, it would be anywhere from pick 7 to about pick 13 or 14. So I'm looking at a mid to late lottery selection here for Dunn, and I think this is kind of the ceiling for where he potentially gets drafted, at least with the way things are looking right now. Of course, a lot can change. Maybe he catches a heater from behind the three-point line, maybe impresses people in his own private workouts before the draft, but as of currently, he looks like a mid-lottery pick, and because of that, the Spurs, I think, do pretty well here, 7th overall. Pick number 8, we move on to the Chicago Bulls, and with the 8th overall pick, the Bulls need to do some building, and there's some questions about who's going to be on this roster long term. Of course, we presume Zach LaVine will not be on this roster much longer. We also can kind of make assumptions about DeMar DeRozan. We'll see what happens with Nikola Vucevic as well. But I think the Bulls have found something very, very big in Coby White. He's really kind of taken a big step forward going back to the end of last season to where he is now currently. He's had an absolute great run of games in recent history, and I think because of that, the Bulls can look at him and say, he's a core piece for us moving forward. Patrick Williams has started to look a little bit better in recent stretch of play as well. So the Bulls, while they're kind of in a weird spot and they've got a bunch of aging talent and they have to make some moves to get out of this situation, there are some things to be hopeful about. And I think one thing that I would want to see for Chicago is implementing a pass-first point guard, someone who can facilitate for others. And this is a player who in recent mocks I've had in the top 5 or top 4 picks even. And at pick number 8 here, he falls a little bit because of his recent stretch of games. He did have one really great game recently, but outside of that, it's been a little up and down. And that player here, 8th overall for the Bulls, is Isaiah Collier out of USC. And he is a pass-first point guard. I think he's got really good passing vision, and he's a downhill monster. He's able to get to the rim, play through contact. He's built like an NFL linebacker. Really strong. He's got wide, broad shoulders, a lot of muscle on his frame already. And I think once he gets to the NBA, he's going to get into even better shape. He's going to be very well conditioned. I think he's going to be just one of the strongest guards we see in the NBA, period. I think he's going to be able to mitigate shot blocking with his ability to go into the chest of a defender, knock them off balance, and still finish plays at the rim. The question really for him is, what does the three-point shot look like? And that's been a huge concern even before he even stepped foot on USC's campus, because we just don't really know what that's going to ever translate to. He was not a great three-point shooter, not a great shooter in general in high school, hasn't been a great shooter in college so far. He's been a reluctant shooter, to say the least. And well, look, the potential's there for him if he works on his jump shot, if he develops his jump shot. There's a lot to work with, but also if we're pointing out other flaws, defensively he's been a little lackadaisical, lazy. His pick and roll defense is pretty poor. I think his screen navigation is shaky at best. There's a lot of things to work with here with Isaiah Collier. So while they have Coby White, this is a developmental project. He's not going to come in and be an 18 point per game scoring rookie. I think he probably comes in and scores like 11, 12 points per game if you play him a bunch, probably 4 to 5, maybe 6 assists a game if you really utilize him a ton. But I think the long-term outlook is maybe he develops into a 17 point per game scorer, maybe a 7 or 8 assist per game kind of guy. And then outside of that, he's got the strength to become a good defender. It's just there's got to be a lot of work, and there's got to be a little bit more drive in his game when it comes to the willingness and want to defend. So I'm not sitting here and saying he's a bad pick. In fact, I think this is a pretty good value pick for the Bulls, 8th overall, because if I had to rank him currently, there's a couple of guys that have gone above him that I probably would pass on for him specifically. But it really comes down to hey, do you believe he's going to take a step forward as a shooter? And do you believe he's going to buy in and actually guard and play defense? And those are tough things to answer positively about right now, to be honest with you. So we're still waiting to see the best from Isaiah Collier, but I think there's a ton of talent to work with, and that's why the Bulls select him 8th overall. Pick number 9, we move on to the Atlanta Hawks, and it sounds more and more like they are choosing a direction as well. With the likely seller tag at the trade deadline, we'll see what happens with Dejounte Murray. This selection kind of implies that Dejounte Murray gets traded, whether it's this trade deadline or this offseason. I think the Hawks are going to look to completely reconstruct their team around Trae Young and Jalen Johnson. Those have been the recent reports. I would probably assume Onyeka Okongwu becomes a long-term piece as well of that combination. We'll see what happens with Clint Capella. We'll see what happens with Bogdan Bogdanovic. But the player here I have 9th overall for the Atlanta Hawks is a really safe selection. I have the Hawks here selecting Reed Sheppard out of Kentucky. This is a guy whose stock just continues to rise and grow. Draft analytics, people love him. He's really an efficient player. Honestly, kind of reminds me a little bit of like an Austin Reeves, but a little bit of a better shooting Austin Reeves, which makes him sound like a really great player. Now, there's things he doesn't do as well as Austin Reeves. Of course, he wasn't as ball dominant as Reeves was at Oklahoma, for example. But Reeves, I mean, like as a kind of decision maker, was pretty reliable. And I think Reed Sheppard is proving that as well. There's games where he's racking up 4, 5, 6 assists. And he's just making easy, simple plays, and he's also a really capable shooter with range. And I think the Hawks here, like again, this isn't a pick that turns you into a playoff team instantly, but I think he's a really safe build-around player. And as you're kind of looking to resupplement around Trae Young and Jalen Johnson, you just want to take players who I think fit your team identity and fit around your best player. And I think Sheppard's a guy who, look, he can thrive with the ball in his hands at times, but he's a little bit like Kevin Huerter, where he doesn't need to have the ball to be productive. And when he has the ball, he's kind of quick decision-y with it. So he's able to catch it, make a quick read, get off the basketball again. And I think if you're trying to maximize Trae Young in this league, those are the types of players you need to have who are productive in those types of roles. And I think Reed Sheppard here, maybe a little high of a pick at pick number 9 based on where I've mocked him in the past, but I think it's warranted with how he's recently played. And just kind of the player that he is in general, his DNA, his makeup, I think just fits Atlanta and fits playing around Trae Young in a backcourt with him, assuming Dejounte Murray gets traded. Remember, the Hawks also have Kobe Buffkin. So I kind of like that young trio of Trae Young, Kobe Buffkin, Reed Sheppard. I think there's a lot to work with there if you're Atlanta. Moving on to pick number 10, we move on to the Houston Rockets here. And with the Rockets, specifically, I think if you're going to point to how their first year is going, there's been a lot of high positives. The defense is much better. Now their offensive rebounding is down a little bit, but because of that, their transition defense is much better as well. In fact, they're limiting the fewest transition scoring opportunities in the entire NBA right now. The Rockets are just honestly a pretty good team. Ime Udoka, like I said in the offseason, is going to do a great job with this team, and he's done so far. And with this pick here at number 10 overall, even though the Rockets are playing really well, they have a top 10 pick because of their trade a few years ago with the Brooklyn Nets. The Nets kind of on a recent skid. Rockets fans should be smiling ear to ear because of that. And now with a top 10 selection, the Houston Rockets here select Donovan Clingan from UConn. And this is a perfect home run pick for Houston, because I think if we're going to point to one massive fatal flaw that this team has right now, it's the backup center spot. They just haven't gotten the production from Jock Landale that they were hoping to get when they signed him to a 4-year, $32 million contract. Luckily for them, the final 3 years of that contract are non-guaranteed. So will we see Jock Landale back in Houston next year? My early premature guess would be probably not. So because of that, they've been playing Jeff Green at center, and I think that they have a chance here to upgrade pretty significantly if they are able to get their hands on Donovan Clingan in the draft. And for me, Clingan is a player that I think just makes a ton of sense for Houston, and I actually made a video breaking down Jalen Green's game and kind of honestly digging into the numbers on the Rockets pick and roll. I think that they're just kind of leaving some points on the table because they don't have an excellent screen setter. Alperen Şengün is an all-star level center. They're fully as out in the open. I believe that. He's such a good, talented young player. But I still think that if you're like looking to maximize Jalen Green, maximize Fred VanVleet a little bit more, I think you get a bigger, stronger body in there to play backup center. And Clingan at 7'1" offers you that with a really wide, broad shoulder and frame. And he's somebody who's going to be able to set good screens. That's pretty much exclusively what he did his first year at UConn. Set a ton of screens for Jordan Hawkins, both on and off the basketball. And I think this year we've seen some really good growth from Clingan as well on the offensive end. And defensively as well. His block rate is through the roof. He's a player that I think is going to be able to impact winning at a pretty good level in the NBA. And I think for the Rockets here, you're addressing probably your biggest flaw, your biggest weakness, which is backup center, with a lottery level talent. And that's a real kind of blessing that most teams don't get the opportunity to do. If you're picking in the lottery, typically you're not trying to just address one flaw. And I think the Rockets here, given the fact that their pick comes from the Nets, have kind of a unique situation and advantage here over some of these other teams where they're able to select for need. And basically because of that, they're going to address a big time weakness on their current roster. Moving on here to pick number 11, we have the Oklahoma City Thunder here. This pick comes from the Utah Jazz from a trade quite a while ago, and this trade is insane. So this pick is actually top 10 protected, but currently the Jazz have the 11th worst record in the NBA, which means this pick in my mock draft is 11th overall. And because of that, the Thunder are getting a really nice premium lottery level asset here again. And this comes from the Derek Favors salary dump from quite a while ago. So just crazy. But here with this opportunity, the Thunder are almost in the same spot that I just talked about with the Rockets, where, look, they're an even better team than Houston. They've got a ton of young talent. They don't really have a lot of needs even. So you're kind of drafting maybe off of upside. And one little thing that I think the Thunder team could use a bit more of, and I think a lot of the people clamoring for Lauri Markkanen to be an Oklahoma City Thunder would agree with this, is like, can they get a little bit more size? Can they get just a bit bigger in the front court? Doesn't mean that they need to necessarily have another center, but maybe a big power forward, another kind of 6'10", 6'11" body in their lineup would go a long way in helping them. So because of that, with the 11th overall pick, I have the Oklahoma City Thunder selecting Tidjane Salaun, playing currently for Cholet in France. And I think Salaun is a really interesting fit, not only for Oklahoma City, but for the NBA, because when you're looking at kind of the growth of the NBA over the last 20, 30 years, a player who's able to stretch the floor, shoot from the perimeter is super impressive and important. And especially when they're 6'10", 6'11", they've got a bigger frame to them because you're able to stretch out defenses. That's been a huge part of the Thunder's identity since drafting Chet Holmgren. They've just been looking for positionless playmakers, guys who can make plays off the bounce, and Salaun doesn't necessarily offer that, but he's the play finisher archetype that I think Oklahoma City's lacking. They have a bunch of guys who can create shots for others, break down people off of a dribble drive, and make things happen. Salaun's a guy who can finish off those opportunities. So if you get a Jalen Williams drive and kick, Salaun can knock down a corner three. If you get a drive and dump from Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Salaun can finish around the rim over a smaller defender. This gives Oklahoma City a little bit more positional flexibility when it comes to their matchups. If they want to play a bit bigger, they could put Holmgren and Salaun both on the floor together and offer a little bit more size around their other guard perimeter players, and because of that, maybe they can post up a bit more frequently. Maybe they're able to match up better on the defensive end without really sacrificing as much of their offensive spacing. And I think honestly, Salaun, yes, he doesn't necessarily give you that dribble drive, doesn't necessarily give you that ability to make the next play as a facilitator, but I think getting another play finisher, and with how good of a coach Mark Daigneault is, I think he's going to be able to maximize that type of player pretty easily. And honestly, I think it's just a really good selection for a team that they're already loaded. They don't really have a lot of needs. It's just an example of the rich getting richer here, 11th overall. Pick number 12, we move on to the New Orleans Pelicans. This pick comes from the Los Angeles Lakers from the Anthony Davis trade, and this is actually an option pick, and not the typical swap option we're used to where they get to have the pick if it's higher. They actually get a choice between 2024 and 2025. In my recent mock drafts, the Lakers were a playoff team, so I had the Pelicans passing up on that option, and the Lakers would have kept the pick in this year's draft. But with the Lakers' recent skid, the Pelicans now look at this selection and say, hey, it's 12th overall. That's a pretty good pick. Let's try and get this in and use this selection. And because of that, 12th overall here, I love this selection for them. The New Orleans Pelicans select Rob Dillingham from Kentucky, and I've loved Dillingham's game even before he was at Overtime Elite. He's just a player who has a lot of juice, a lot of electricity. He's a downhill explosive player, and he's able to create shots off the bounce. And honestly, when I was thinking through this mock draft, again, it takes me a couple days to put these mocks together. With Dillingham specifically, when I mocked him to New Orleans initially, I thought, this is kind of the player that they were hoping Devontae Graham would be when they got him in a sign and trade. I think Dillingham really exemplifies all of the positives of Devontae Graham's game, and really way less of the negative. He's really extremely quick. I think he's a much more efficient shot maker and shooter. I think he's a better decision maker as a passer than Devontae Graham as well. And because of that, I think the Pelicans here are getting a player who's going to be super reliable for them. And I think if you're pointing at a couple things the Pelicans need, it's probably another point guard, another guy who can get his own shot off quickly and be a facilitator for the offense. Now, I know they drafted Dyson Daniels. I look at him more as like a wing than a true point guard. While, yes, he has playmaking capabilities, I don't know if he would necessarily be classified as a point guard, just given kind of the modern adjustment to that role of you have to be a shot maker, shot creator, you have to be able to run a ton of pick and rolls every game. Daniels has got a lot of skills, but I don't know if he necessarily fits that. I think Dillingham fits that quite a bit cleaner. And when you look at New Orleans roster construction, they have a lot of length, size, defensive ability around a player like Dillingham, where some of his concerns about being a little bit smaller, a little bit wiry, not having that much weight on his body, well, you've got Herb Jones, you've got Brandon Ingram, you've got Zion Williamson, who, yes, I know Zion's not a great defender, but he's got a bunch of strength and size, and he's athletic, and when he turns it on defensively, he can make some plays. You've got Valanciunas, who's huge. You've got Larry Nance, who's switchable as a center. You've got a lot of bodies. Obviously, we haven't even mentioned Trey Murphy yet. You've got a lot of guys who can complement a Rob Dillingham, and I think because of that, this pick is a no-brainer for them. For me, I look at Rob Dillingham currently as a top 10 player in the draft. I like his game a ton, and I think the Pelicans are doing really well here selecting him 12th overall. Pick number 13, we are back to the Portland Trailblazers, who, remember, earlier on in this draft, we had them select Cody Williams 5th overall, and I think with Portland, we're still in the part of their rebuild, their retooling after trading Damian Lillard, where it's all about upside and potential. And this pick is really good, not only because this player does have a lot of upside, but he also fits pretty well next to their young core. And then with this pick coming from the Golden State Warriors through the Drew Holiday trade through Boston, you're looking at the Portland Trailblazers here, 13th overall, selecting Jacoby Walter out of Baylor. And on the year, Jacoby Walter has been fantastic. He's shooting over 40% from three, offers a good amount of range as well. He's comfortable shooting well behind the college three-point line, which makes me believe that he's going to be able to shoot NBA three-pointers pretty easily, pretty quickly into his career. And I think with Walter, you're getting a guy who complements Scoot Henderson and Shaedon Sharpe extremely well because of his ability to space off of those two players, make plays off the catch, shoot the ball off the catch, and also just be able to attack closeouts. Jacoby Walter is not just a sharpshooter. He's not just a catch-and-shoot guy. He's able to make plays off the bounce a bit. He's a scorer as well, and I think because of that, there's a lot of upside in this pick that you're not just asking him to be a standstill marksman. You're asking him to be a competent spacer off of your younger players as well, your other young talent. But then when he has the ball, he's able to go make other plays and make some things happen for himself off the dribble. So because of that, I think Walter is a really interesting fit for the Blazers at 13. Now, there's still some areas he has to work on. He's only shooting 43% from the field. I think his inside the arc scoring could still go up a bit when it comes to his efficiency. But I think those are things that when you look at a young player, they typically struggle in those areas. And as they kind of mature, the game slows down for them. They get better at those things. And I think for Portland, we're going to see that not only with some of their already existing players like Sharpe and Scoot and players who have a lot of those traits as well, but Jacoby Walter will grow in those roles in that area as well. And I think he would complement their young core extremely well. Moving on to pick number 14, we're back to the Oklahoma City Thunder. So not one, but two lottery selections. This one comes from the Houston Rockets. And I talked about size and how important that was when I had them select Tidjane Salaun, 11th overall. Now at 14th, they're in a spot here to address that again. And this one's a little bit different. This isn't necessarily just this is another guy who can space and be a play finisher. This is a player who offers you really good athleticism, some rebounding, and some shot blocking, and I like this quite a bit. Now, it's a little high, to be honest with you, for kind of where his range would presumably be, but the Thunder have 3 first-round picks in this year's draft. I don't think that they should be overly worried about, hey, where would this player get drafted by other teams? I think they should be worried about roster building and kind of fleshing out some of their weak points on their team currently. And for that reason, 14th overall, I have the Oklahoma City Thunder selecting Kel'el Ware from Indiana, who's having a great season for the Hoosiers. Last year with the Oregon Ducks, just didn't really get the opportunity as consistently as he should have. And now this year, he's building upon having an opportunity. He's putting up really good numbers. He's flashing his athleticism on both ends of the floor. He's got really good shot blocking timing. He's somebody who, with good length, size, rim protection, prowess, I think he can get on the floor for Oklahoma City in minutes that Chet Holmgren's likely not on the court. So again, it's just about adding more size, implementing a little bit more length, and some offensive talent as well. Kel'el Ware's, I think, a good rim roller. I think he gives you a different look than what your other bigs currently do. Jalen Williams, the big, of course, one of the better charge takers in the NBA. I just don't know if that's something the Thunder are going to long-term rely on, though, whereas I think Kel'el Ware does make some good sense for them moving forward as a complementary big to their other pieces. On the year, Ware is averaging about 15 points a night, 9 rebounds a game as well. He's shooting about 56% from the field, and he's actually dabbled with some three-pointers up to this point too, shooting about 33% from behind the arc at the college level. Now, I'm not saying that he's going to instantly come in and be shooting a bunch of NBA threes, but it's something that I think if you're banking on long-term development, maybe Ware, who's only a sophomore, can grow into that a bit more. And maybe you find a real steal here even at 14, even though, again, like I said, the draft range is probably a little bit lower than the lottery for Ware. I think that, honestly, when you're drafting for fit, and given the Oklahoma City Thunder's ability to develop, Kel'el Ware could still be a really nice selection for them, 14th overall. Pick 15, we move on to the Phoenix Suns, who they've struggled a bit this year, and actually this pick is technically owed as a swap to other teams, but luckily for the Suns, those teams are significantly worse than them, so this pick still remains in Phoenix's control here. And while the Suns are hoping to finish better than 15th in the NBA draft, I think that getting a player here at this spot could really complement their roster, and I think kind of what we talked about with the Thunder earlier and some of these other teams that are looking for skilled size, I think the Suns have a good opportunity to add that in their own regard here in kind of what is a pretty strong point of this draft, a bunch of players who I think offer some unique upside from the power forward position. For the Phoenix Suns, I have them selecting Bobi Klintman from Kayerns Taipans over in the NBL. So we're going to have a few NBL prospects in this draft. We already talked about one earlier at the start of the draft with Alex Sarr. This is our second. There's going to be a few more as well. So Klintman, to me, what he offers, of course, played one college year at Wake Forest. He's an interesting big because of his ability to operate off of different spots of the floor. He's comfortable shooting what would be above the break threes. He's kind of flashed that a bit more this year in the NBL, but he's also, I think, got some intriguing skill sets as a passer. I think his ability to play off the short roll, operate out of the middle of the floor against some zones, I think could be utilized at the NBA level for sure. And then I also think that when you're looking at his game in general, he's a good cutter. I think he's able to impact the offensive rebounding game when he's crashing out of the corner. And I think that's really where you're going to see him sit most often, is he's going to be a corner occupier in an NBA offense. So what does he do for you out of that? I think it's catch and shoot out of the corner. He can drive closeouts, and I think on top of that, he rebounds and he knows how to cut. So you're looking at a player who, if you're going to put someone in the corner, I think Klintman's the type of guy to maximize that type of role and really find a good deal of success for himself. And for Phoenix, that's exactly what you're hoping. You're looking for a player who's not going to demand the ball, but will be able to play off the catch, be a timely cutter, and complement your big three of Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, and Devin Booker. Now, when those three guys are all on the floor, it almost feels like a miracle, but listen, Klintman, I think, gives them some size defensively, gives them a little bit more rebounding as well, which I think is all important. Phoenix has quite a bit of flaws right now. I thought that was pretty evident coming into this season, and I think they'll address some of that here with the Bobi Klintman selection, 15th overall. Pick number 16, we move on to the Miami Heat, and I swear I just cannot escape this mock selection. I just love it so much for both parties. I love it for the team, and I love it for the prospect. 16th overall, I have the Miami Heat here selecting Judah Mintz out of Syracuse. And when you consider what Miami does, this is a perfect fit. Judah Mintz plays a ton of 2-3 zone, playing at Syracuse, of course. The Miami Heat run more 2-3 zone than any other team in the NBA. That number is not even close either. They run zone all the time. Honestly, like, their numbers have fluctuated from anywhere around 20 to 30%, and most other teams are hovering below 10%. So the Heat and Eric Spoelstra do a great job of incorporating it, mixing it up, giving teams different looks. And Judah Mintz, I think one concern you have with him is, what is he as a point of attack defender? Is he a stopper ever? The answer to that is definitely no. Is he a good point of attack defender? Can he be a reliable point of attack defender? There's still a lot of questions about that. But when you look at the offensive talent, it is undeniable what Judah Mintz can be in the NBA. And just honestly, what he's doing in college right now is super impressive, because he's a really good player. This season, he's averaging over 19 points a game in the college realm, and he's shooting 44% from the field and 35% from three. That's a pretty noticeable increase from where he shot 32% from three a year ago as a freshman. He's a tough shot maker. He's got a lot of talent. He's got a lot of capabilities when it comes to putting the ball in the basket. And I think one thing we've pointed to as a flaw for Miami in recent years is just they need one more shot creator. They need another guy who can go get a bucket. Tyler Hero's having a great season. Bam Adebayo's taking another step forward, I think, on both ends of the ball, to be honest with you. We know how good Jimmy Butler is, especially when he turns it up every single playoffs. But I think Mintz just gives them a little bit more electricity and a little bit more swagger on the offensive end of the court with his shot-making prowess. I think, people are going to point to the assist numbers too. He is a pretty high usage player, but doesn't generate a ton of assists per game. I'm not too worried about that. He's averaging about 4 assists per game this season. And I think in Miami, Spoelstra just knows how to maximize every single player that they seemingly have. I think Judah Mintz, there's a ton of potential here. And I think if you draft him 16th overall, if you're Miami, you feel really good about it. Obviously, they did a great job selecting Jaime Jaquez in the last draft. He's been a home run pick for them when they selected him 19th overall. And I think 16th year, you walk out of the draft with Judah Mintz, you've got a really good young player on your hands with some serious long-term upside, filling a pretty big positional need given the fact that Kyle Lowry's headed toward free agency. They lost Gabe Vincent this last free agency period. So I think getting a guy like Judah Mintz into your building just makes a ton of sense in terms of where your current roster is at and his actual skill set. Pick 17, we move on to the Orlando Magic, who have had a really nice season for themselves. Recently, they haven't been nearly as good as they were to start the year, but they're still a feel-good team this season, and it's nice to see some of these younger teams take a notable step forward, and the Orlando Magic have done that. Big part of what they do is defend. They're one of the better young defensive teams in the league. Jamal Mosley's a fantastic coach. He's gotten a ton of buy-in from everybody on the defensive end of the floor there, and they have a lot of length and size and honestly big strong bodies, and that goes a long way in complementing a good team defense. And if you look at what Orlando likes to draft historically, it's a lot of length, size, and players with good physical frames. And I think this player here, 17th overall, is another good example of a guy who has a lot of the traits, has a lot of the physicals that checks out to be a good NBA player. And now it's just about kind of finding out those complementary skill sets and just getting the most out of him through his development. And 17th overall here, I have the Orlando Magic selecting Trentyn Flowers from the Adelaide 36ers, playing in the NBL, yet another NBL prospect. And for Orlando specifically, why does Trentyn Flowers make so much sense? Well, he's still growing. He's about 6'9" now. He's put on just a lot more weight. He's kind of fluctuating now around 211 to 214 pounds from my reports on it. And I think he's a player that he's just growing in his game. Now, his role with the Adelaide 36ers has been somewhat inconsistent. You're going to see him a bit higher on Flowers than most other people, but I think that I'm very well warranted in my reasoning here because he's very good playing off the catch. To start the year, the Adelaide 36ers tried putting the ball in his hands a little bit more. I think they kind of found out he's not a point guard. That doesn't mean he's a bad player. I think he's just more of a true wing player, and that's a good thing, especially given the fact that Orlando likes to play through Franz Wagner. They really like to play through Paolo Banchero, of course. They have Anthony Black, who's capable of bringing the ball up the court. I think Trentyn Flowers fits best in Orlando playing off the wing, and I think with his length, size, he fits the Magic's draft history, things that they're looking for. And I also think just with his game in general, he's a player who, like we talked about earlier with Matas Buzelis, even though he's not a point guard, he's able to handle the basketball. He's a wing with ball handling capabilities. You can run him through a pick and roll. He can make reads. He has actually flashed some nice crab dribbling capabilities, although he doesn't do it a ton in the NBL. I think he's got the skill set that once you get him into the NBA with a little bit more spacing and pace around him, you're going to be able to see some more of these positives that Trentyn Flowers has. He's a really good athlete, jumps out of the gym. I think he's going to impress people a ton when we get to the individual workout stage of the offseason and just the draft process in general. So I think 17th overall here, Orlando getting Trentyn Flowers. Not only does he fit their drafting identity, the things that they usually look for, but I think he's a good upside prospect too that I think is going to be able to really maximize his talent with a good development staff there in Orlando. Moving on to pick 18, we have the Indiana Pacers here, and the Pacers have had a really good season. And I think when I was going through this mock draft, prepping this one, it's just I keep landing on the same conclusion every single time with the Pacers, every mock draft I put together, and it's they really don't need the 2 first-round picks that they have this year. I just really think that they should trade these selections. I think it would be best for them if they're able to turn them into either future picks that are far out to keep open their trade flexibility. Maybe they're able to turn each of these picks into a future first instead of this year's first, and maybe you're able to roll over your assets as other players on your roster get expensive. You're able to renew your depth with young talent. We'll see what they do. That's probably the way I would operate, or if you can package them for a good win-now player currently, that would also make some sense. Of course, there's rumors about Pascal Siakam. Who knows what's going to really come to fruition there. But for me, 18th overall with the Pacers here, I have a player that I think does fit Kevin Pritchard's kind of draft tendencies as well a bit, and that's a player here. This is going to make Pacers fans shudder a little bit, but 18th overall, I have the Pacers selecting Kyle Filipowski from Duke. And I just kind of get flashbacks to when the Pacers drafted TJ Leaf in the first round a few years ago. Now, Filipowski is a much better player than TJ Leaf. He's more comfortable with the ball in his hands. It's not like the TJ Leaf pick. Now, stylistically, the player, maybe it's just that they're both white, tall guys. I don't know what it is, but it's made me think about it all day long after kind of settling on that selection before recording this mock draft. And for me, Filipowski, I still think does fit actually pretty well in Indiana off of Halliburton. You think about kind of some of the lineups that they have out there, whether you're running Isaiah Jackson at center, Jalen Smith at center a bit, or you're running Miles Turner. I think Filipowski could work with any of those 3 guys. Remember last year as a true freshman, Filipowski was basically running the Duke offense with Derek Lively. So if you're looking for how does he fit next to Isaiah Jackson, well, there's your answer. Pretty well. They're pretty good at Duke, and I think Isaiah Jackson's taken some meaningful steps forward this year as well in the NBA. And I think that Filipowski specifically is a guy that is going to be able to utilize a rim runner. Now, I still think that last year, watching him with Derek Lively, he didn't fully utilize that rim runner. He didn't use the vertical space as much. He didn't throw as many lobs as I wanted him to. But I still think that that's something you could get out of him. You could coach him up in that. And of course, the one thing, when you watch the Pacers, it's impossible to not notice how good Halliburton and Turner are together in the pick and pop game. And I think that's one thing that Filipowski offers that other big men just simply do not as much, is the ability to step up behind the 3-point line. It's not like he is going to be the most reliable 3-point shooter ever for you as a big man, but I think he's going to give you some real functionality from the position. This year he's shooting 31% from 3, but he is shooting 50% from the field in general. And I think just with the fact that he's shooting currently about 3 3-pointers a game, about the same number he shot last year, you can feel pretty comfortable in what he's offering to you simply because he's a 7-footer who can handle the basketball, shoot. He was a former top 5 recruit in his high school class. And listen, again, my whole position here is I'd rather the Pacers trade the pick and keep their long-term flexibility open. I don't think that they have a real role based on how much depth they currently have. They already have 2 young first-round rookies who aren't playing that much for them in Jarris Walker and Ben Sheppard. I would like to see them hold on to these picks and trade them out to future years. But if they are going to draft, Filipowski's a player who makes sense from a skill set standpoint that fits around their other existing pieces a bit. Pick 19, we move on to the Cleveland Cavaliers now. And with the 19th overall section, the Cavaliers here are going to select Stephon Castle out of UConn, a player who I've had in the lottery in previous mock drafts. Kind of falls out of it here, and there's some real questions going on right now about his jump shot. He just hasn't really hit a ton of jumpers, and that's a pretty big red flag, especially for a player who I think a lot of people look at as a point guard or at least a combo guard. He's not shooting the ball. He's shooting about 20% from 3. He's been pretty inconsistent as a jump shooter, not only from behind the 3-point line, but inside of it as well. Now, he does have a lot of good touch, and I don't want to make it seem like Stephon Castle is a bad player, because there's a lot of things that he does extremely well that fascinate me. He's shooting over 50% from the field still, despite not being a three-point shooter. He's got excellent touch. He's shooting about 58% on twos. He's got a really nice floater. He's really comfortable around the rim. He's got a good big frame to finish. Honestly, if you're asking me, like 19 feels low for Stephon Castle, but I was thinking about, like, could I see Indiana drafting him? No. Could I see Orlando? Maybe. I'm just not sure if Orlando makes as much sense. You could maybe exchange Trentyn Flowers and Stephon Castle. That makes some sense to me too, but I didn't land on that for this mock. I don't know. I felt like you need some more shooting, and Castle just doesn't give you that if you're Orlando. For Cleveland, they've already addressed some of the shooting. They brought in Max Strus, they brought in George Niang, and obviously, you know, they still need guys like Stephon Castle, especially with questions right now about Donovan Mitchell. What's his long-term future look like in Cleveland? I think Stephon Castle is a player who, next to Darius Garland, still offers size, length, athleticism, finishing around the rim, touch. I think those things are all still important for Cleveland, and you're likely bringing Castle off the bench as a complement to your two lead guards, even if Mitchell stays. So because of that, I think that Castle could still be a nice long-term fit in Cleveland, and I think that really you're just marking, hey, there's some areas in his game that need some significant development for him to become a really good player, a really important player from this draft. Because if he figures out that jump shot even to a certain extent where he's just hitting like maybe 33%, 34, 35% of his threes, that's a dramatic change from what he's doing right now, and I'm aware of that. My whole point is I don't need him to be an elite three-point shooter. I don't need him to be shooting 37, 38% from three. I need him to get to slightly below average. And if he gets to slightly below average, the rest of his game makes him still a good player. Just we need to see him get there before I can comfortably say that he's worthy of a top 10 selection, even though a lot of his game suggests that he would be outside of the shooting and outside of the shot making. Pick 20, we move on to the New York Knicks, and with the 20th overall selection, I have the New York Knicks selecting Jared McCain out of Duke. I like this selection quite a bit for the Knicks because of fit, and I think given their recent trade for OG Anunoby, they clearly internally understand the importance of fit and how to maximize their players. Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle, I think, are better off having an OG Anunoby type player next to them than playing with an RJ Barrett. And given the fact that they just traded away Emmanuel Quickley, one thing a lot of people are pointing to, a little bit more bench scoring juice, and I think Jared McCain can give you that. He's currently shooting the three very, very well from the college three-point line at Duke, and I think he's going to have the ability to adjust pretty easily to the NBA three-point line as well, just given his shot mechanics, his form, his release point. He's got a pretty quick trigger on it as well, and I think with his game, he's a complement guard. He's not a lead point guard. Notice I haven't had Tyrese Proctor go off the board yet, who I still like as a prospect myself quite a bit, because Tyrese Proctor is a lead guard. He wouldn't necessarily fit here in New York next to Jalen Brunson as much, whereas I think Jared McCain kind of has some more of those similarities to a Dante DiVincenzo, and we know how well DiVincenzo fits there in New York. You're getting another kind of example of that, maybe a little bit of a better shooter, a little bit less defensive ability than what we've seen from DiVincenzo through his early career, but I think McCain he's a complementary piece, and the Knicks need more of that. Everyone's focused on the top end talent. That's important, and to be honest here, the Knicks have back-to-back picks. They have pick 20 and pick 21. It's very likely that we could see the Knicks target something else, like target a big trade for a player, and I think that's something, just like I talked about with the Pacers, that I would recommend for them, given their current acclimation of depth, and I don't think that they necessarily need these picks to be a really good team. But if they pick here, it's got to be about fit. It's got to be about guys who complement their existing pieces, and I think Jared McCain does that very, very well, which leads us here into pick 21. And with the 21st overall pick, I have the New York Knicks selecting Kevin McCullar Jr. from Kansas. Now, with this pick, I have a few different thoughts and feelings about it. First of all, I think McCullar's a really great college player. He's having a fantastic season for the Jayhawks. He's taken another big step forward in his game. He's obviously been really, really productive, and we've seen a lot of good Kansas players find success at the college level and maybe not as much at the NBA level. And that's a testament to Bill Self, how good of a coach he is to maximize those guys at the collegiate level and really play a lot of winning basketball. Look at his win percentage throughout his coaching career. It's unbelievable. McCullar here, to me, the one kind of concern I have is he a little bit Wendell Moore Jr.-y? And what I mean by that is, is that a really good college player who's capable of averaging 15 to 20 points per game in college, but then he gets to the NBA and you're like, what's he really good at? What's he really great at? And you're like, I don't really know the answer to that. To me, McCullar has a little bit of that in his game, but at the end of the day, I still think that there's something there with McCullough of like, hey, he's plug and play. You can put him on the wing. He can knock down some shots, make some plays off the bounce. He can attack closeouts. Those are things that are important. And again, for the Knicks, like I said with the Jared McCain selection, the big thing for them is drafting players who fit their existing talent. And McCullough's not a guy who's going to be a detriment to your other pieces. He's not going to be a ball stopper. He's not going to slow down your offense. He's not going to bog things up by getting in the way a bunch. He's going to be an ancillary piece. And I think that is important for New York. And I think, a reason that I think we're going to see them springboard over the next couple of weeks is they have OG Anunoby, who is a really perfect complementary player. Now you add a couple more complementary guys in McCain and McCullough, and all of a sudden you start cooking with gas a bit. You have just everything flows easier. Your offense moves quicker. The ball swings side to side. You get open looks. And when you have open looks for NBA talent, they typically go in. So I think there's a lot to be hopeful for if you're a Knicks fan. I think McCullough would be a really nice selection for you. And at the end of the day, if you walk away with two guys who fit your team, fit your rotation, it's a huge win, especially with the Knicks possibly lining up to make another big trade or two in the near future. With our next selection here, we have the New Orleans Pelicans picking number 22. This is their own selection because the Pelicans have been playing fantastic basketball as of late. They've been on a huge stretch of wins. Of course, they did have one letdown loss the other night, but the Pelicans, for the most part, have just been playing dominant basketball behind Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram, and their new look offense. They've just been flowing really, really well, and I've been very impressed watching them play. Zion Williamson just looks like a beast on the floor. And we've already talked about the Pelicans a bit in this mock. Of course, we had them go with Rob Dillingham, who I thought was a really nice pick for them as a point guard, 12th overall. But remember earlier I said, hey, look, I still think they could use another center. And that's exactly what we're going to look to address here. 22nd overall, I have the New Orleans Pelicans selecting Daron Holmes II from Dayton. Yes, we have a Dayton Flyer here going in the first round. This is the first time since Obi Toppin was drafted back in the 2020 draft where you look at a Flyer getting selected in the first round, but I think he's going to help this Pelicans offense soar, no pun intended, because of his improving and increased skill set year in, year out. He's just gotten better every single season for Dayton. This season, he's averaging over 17 points a game, 7 rebounds a night as well. He's posting a career high 2.6 assists per game, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I think he would fit into New Orleans offense, sitting at the top of the key, being a ball reversal guy, going into and triggering dribble handoffs, I think would all be really good for him. This year now he is shooting not nearly as good as his career percentage from the field. He's down to 54% from the field, whereas for his career he's a 60% shooter. But the big reason why is because he's tripled his number of three-point attempts as a center. At about 6'10", he's not a true anchor defensively, but he's got length and some size that you can present as a center in the NBA, especially with how the league's gotten a little bit smaller at some of the big man positions, a little bit thinner, a little bit lighter. I think Daron Holmes fits that pretty well as well at about 220 pounds, and he's shooting the three at a 40% clip this season. Now, again, it's only about 2 3-pointers a game. It's not the biggest volume. It's not, oh my gosh, this guy's going to walk into the league as a stretch big man. But what he is going to be is a little bit of a threat. And I think as he develops, he gets more repetitions, continues to improve as a shooter like he's done throughout his entire career so far at Dayton as a junior. He's somebody who I think is going to continue to blossom, continue to grow. And for the Pelicans here, if you're looking at taking two players, if you end up with a really good dynamic electric guard in Rob Dillingham and a big man who can shoot a bit, handle the basketball, he's got a really nice right jump hook. Those are things that you can rely on as good additions to your offense without really being huge subtractions to your defense because of the collection of talent you have around them. And for that reason, I like Daron Holmes II quite a bit here for New Orleans 22nd overall. Moving on to pick 23, we have the Atlanta Hawks. This pick comes from the Sacramento Kings. And for Atlanta specifically, remember earlier on we had the Hawks go with Reed Sheppard out of Kentucky. We've been looking for players who fit. That's been the big MO of this draft for the Atlanta Hawks. And 23rd overall, we continue that trend. Reed Sheppard can shoot the basketball, play off the catch, and do a lot of nice things without being ball dominant. Tristan da Silva here is the selection, 23rd overall out of Colorado. Actually, the second Colorado player we've had go in this draft. He's played over 100 career college games. He's a true senior, and this year he's averaging nearly 16 points a night, shooting 52% from the field and 37% from three, with an effective field goal percentage flirting with 61%. So you're looking at a player who I think can impact winning in a positive way. Again, not super ball dominant, kind of a stretch 4 for you. And if you're Atlanta and you're kind of reshaping, retooling your entire roster, De Silva's probably not a starting level player for you, but I think he can be a complement off the bench depending on which way you look to build your team. If you get more slashers, I think De Silva can fit that, but he's got a pretty nice frame to him that you're able to play a little bit small but still get away with it because he's not super tiny. I mean, you can play him in a few different ways that I think is going to be able to maximize this Hawks current rotation that they have. And then also, if you do make some of those bigger trades, I think De Silva is a pretty safe piece in terms of, like, hey, we're not going to have to make roster decisions really that much because of him on our roster. Like, we can go out and accrue talent, and we trust that De Silva is going to be able to fit around those other guys instead of having to trade for players who fit around him. And I think that makes everything a little bit smoother, especially as you're going through a big transformation process like the Hawks currently are. Pick 24, we move on to the Oklahoma City Thunder with their third pick in this first round. Remember, we've addressed a lot of size so far, so of course, naturally, we're going to come back and do what Sam Presti likely is going to do, which is take a guard here. This pick comes from the Los Angeles Clippers, all the way back from the Paul George trade, and this selection is kind of a swing on a guy who hasn't had the freshman season that he was hoping for. The Oklahoma City Thunder here, 24th overall, select DJ Wagner out of Kentucky. And the reasoning here is this is a high upside grab, a player who was a top recruit. He's super fast, electric downhill. He's got some good first step burst, and I think he's a growing decision maker. For him, it's all about how many of the shots that he takes can he make. Is he going to be efficient? I know that sounds like, oh, that's obvious. That's true for every player, but especially for a guy like Wagner. A little bit undersized, you could argue, maybe more of a combo guard than a true point guard. It really comes down to, can he string efficiency together and can he make the shots he's deciding to take? And if the answer to that becomes yes, then the Oklahoma City Thunder are getting a huge steal here because he has the ability to create space. He has the ability to knock down some tough shots when he's got it going. And I think if you look at the history of the NBA draft, especially in recent years, Calipari guards and Kentucky guards are really safe bets. You look at Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Thunder fans, I think you guys know who he is. Obviously, he was a Kentucky guard. Their development path in the NBA just seems to work. They just are always good, seemingly, and I think because of that, the Thunder would feel pretty confident taking a bet here on DJ Wagner. If it doesn't work out, it's not a big deal for them. They have so many more picks coming in the future. They've got a lot of young talent already. If Wagner doesn't pan out, it's not a big deal. But if he does pan out, if he hits, it's just another asset in the treasure trove of pieces that you can continue to build around and gives you a lot more flexibility and roster fluidity going forward. Pick 25, we have the 76ers here now at this spot, and the 76ers, look, they've had an awesome season. Joel Embiid's been absolutely dominant, scoring more points than minutes played this year so far. He's just been unbelievable, firmly in the running for another MVP. And I think for the Sixers, again, kind of operating with a blank slate. I know that they're really good right now. I know a lot of people are going to say, well, they have Tobias Harris, they've got all these pieces. I think really the two pieces you can bank on being there for sure next year are Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. The rest of the roster is up in the air because they're making some plans. They're going to go out and get more players. They're going to get big names this offseason. I almost guarantee it because of the way that Daryl Morey has structured everything. Following the James Harden trade, they have a ton of expiring salaries, expiring contracts. They are slated to have a ton of money this offseason that they could either use in free agency or they could take in players via trade. They've got a bunch of draft picks to trade. Who knows, maybe on draft night even this pick gets dealt. But right now, 25th overall, I think the 76ers go off of upside, pick a player who has a ton of talent, and that is Tyrese Proctor out of Duke. I mentioned him a few picks ago as a lead guard, and you might be saying, oh, that's not what the Sixers need. They have Tyrese Maxey. This is to run their backup bench unit. This is to be a sixth man point guard type, probably not a true sixth man, maybe seventh, eighth man early in his career, but he's really comfortable having the basketball. He's got a good, quick handle. He's actually pretty shifty despite having pretty good positional size as well. Those two things typically aren't as common and interlinked, but Proctor has a little bit of that. He's got some juice in his handle, and I think when you look at what he's going to be able to provide to the Sixers, or maybe in a draft night trade to whatever team ends up landing him, it's somebody who's going to make the right decision a decent amount of the time. I was expecting a bigger sophomore jump from him. Earlier in the draft process, I was looking at him as a potential lottery pick. We haven't seen that jump as much. He's still only averaging about 9.5 points per game. His assist numbers are up slightly. The big thing that is up for him is his efficiency from the field. He's up about 7 or 8 percentage points from the field this season so far. Now his 3-point percentage has only climbed about 1 or 2%, which it's notable, but it's not a huge drastic change like I was kind of hoping to see from him this season. His assist numbers haven't climbed as much as I wanted to see, so it almost sounds like I'm a little disappointed. It's because I still think there's a lot of good things Proctor can do. I think he's a smart, cerebral guard. He has passing vision over defenders with his positional size, and I think honestly drafting him 25th overall, you're getting a player who can play. I think night one of his NBA career, you're getting someone who I trust with the ball in his hands off the bench early on. And I think, honestly, for the Sixers, even though he's not the best fit next to Tyrese Maxey long term, you're still getting a player who I think can play 15 to 25 minutes a night pretty early on in their career and provide something for you on a cheap rookie scale contract while you're still implementing more talent onto your roster, whether that be through trade or free agency. Pick number 26 now, we move on to the Denver Nuggets, and in a lot of these kind of selections for Denver throughout this draft process, I've mocked older prospects because I think that's what we're going to see them continue to do, is surround their current collection of talent with veteran level college players, guys who have more college experience and the ability to kind of implement win now ready players. And a player that I like quite a bit for Denver is Trevon Brazile from Arkansas. He's averaging about 9 points per game this year. For his career average is about 9 points a game. So you might be saying, well, why would you take him? He's an athletic freak, averages over 1.5 blocks per game. He, I think, would be a really nice fit next to Nikola Jokic as a baseline operator, someone who kind of, if you're giving a comparison, would be Aaron Gordon. Now, I don't think he's as talented as Aaron Gordon. Remember, early in his career, Aaron Gordon was a pretty dangerous shot creator for some of those Orlando teams, and I don't think you're going to necessarily get that out of Trevon Brazile, but you're going to get some of the functionality out of him where, hey, he's going to be a high-low option, where Jokic catches the ball around the nail and he can look down to either block, and you're going to see Brazile either for a bounce pass dunk or a lob dunk. And I think with that, there's some just real usage and functionality that he brings to their offense in a way that they need, and their shot blocking to complement Nikola Jokic. I still think the Nuggets could use more of that. I think Brazile brings that for sure. The Nuggets are really good. To be honest, they don't need a ton of anything, but I think, again, if you're just looking for players who are ready to step in, a little bit more mature, a little bit more NBA ready, you're taking a junior here out of Arkansas who has played on good Arkansas teams in the past, and I think has the skill set that we already know fits next to Nikola Jokic well, and you're implementing that onto your bench for situations where Aaron Gordon's hurt or just out of the game, which I think is a good move for the Denver Nuggets overall. Pick 27, back to the Indiana Pacers. This pick comes from the Oklahoma City Thunder, as it is the lowest pick from that swap worse that the Pacers picked up last draft cycle in a trade. And now looking at this selection here, again, I'm going to maintain the same point I made earlier. I don't really know what player here that they could draft that would fit into the rotation in the first year or two of their career. I'm not really sure that there is one. But 27th overall for the Pacers, I have them selecting Justin Edwards out of Kentucky, former top recruit. And I think, again, if you're looking for upside, Justin Edwards is maybe a guy who can grow into that. Right now, he's shooting about 47% from the field. He is only shooting about mid-20s% from three. So there needs to be some real development. He's a left-handed scorer. He's really filled it up in high school. Was a really coveted recruit, and I thought was going to have a much better freshman season for the Kentucky Wildcats. He just has struggled in ways that I wasn't necessarily expecting, but he's still, I think, beneficent in some areas as well, and I don't want to write him off yet. I think kind of the common discourse narrative around him right now is, oh, this guy's not very good, and we don't know how he fits in the NBA. I think he's going to be an okay cutter. I think he's a good athlete, and I think if you're just patient and wait for him, you're going to see some positive things. I think a really great example to compare him to pre-draft is Peyton Watson. Peyton Watson had one of the worst freshman seasons I remember for a draft prospect. I just could not believe that he declared and that he stayed in the draft, and then he ended up being a first-round pick by the Denver Nuggets, I believe 30th overall. I just could not believe it. I didn't understand it, but that's an example of a franchise and a team trusting the development of a player and saying, look, he's a freshman coming out. I know he didn't have a great year. The efficiency wasn't there. The production wasn't there. we still trust some of the skills. And I think Justin Edwards has some of those skills, has some of those physical traits that if you're going to bank on, you could see some real growth and development from him pretty quickly into his career. And also, just if we're being honest with you, he's been more productive than Peyton Watson. Peyton Watson was really bad his freshman season. Justin Edwards has been quite a bit better than that. So it's not the same, it's not an equivalent to Peyton Watson, but I think the example and my point rings through that example. Moving on to pick number 28, we have the Milwaukee Bucks here now, and the Bucks are kind of a tough team to figure out what they could exactly use and need other than perimeter defenders, and there's a couple guys I like for them, but I went with a little bit of a different route because I think that they might be on the verge of shaking their roster up in this next year or so. And I think if you're looking at what they've recently drafted, they've taken some guys who are a little bit older prospects, and those players I think are going to be mainstays on their roster. Andre Jackson Jr. and also Marjon Beauchamp. So if you're looking for wing defenders, I think that they have that waiting. I think that they've got some young guys capable of filling those roles, so I don't think they need to necessarily draft that here 28th overall. Instead, I have them going with Tyler Smith out of G League Ignite. Now, I know Bucks fans are going to say, whoa, our defense isn't that good this year. I think part of that is because there's some inconsistencies between Malik Beasley and Damian Lillard when it comes to your point of attack defense, and I don't think that there's a lot of great conversation right now between the coach and the players about how to optimize Brook Lopez in drop coverage. And because of that, teams are finding that weak spot pretty consistently, so I don't think that it's necessarily a player issue. I think it's more of a scheme issue, and how they're being coached and how they're being utilized is more of the problem there in Milwaukee, to be honest with you. So I'm not going to draft based off of that. I'm going to draft based off of upside, and Tyler Smith's an intriguing player for that reason because he's got length, size, he's able to shoot the ball. He's shooting about 38% from three right now for G League Ignite. At about 6'10", he's a player that I think is going to intrigue a lot of people. Kind of reminiscent of what we saw from Isaiah Todd a few years ago, when he got drafted in the early second round by the Washington Wizards. I just can't get that comparison out of my head, honestly. I think Tyler Smith's better than Isaiah Todd, I do, but I think like the kind of archetype still fits, and I'm a little less high on that type of archetype, but I do think it's an interesting player comparison and something that when you're looking at Milwaukee, if you do end up moving off of Brook Lopez or maybe Bobby Portis, like you could have a need for a guy like Tyler Smith at some point. And I think he complements, as long as he keeps shooting well, he's a pretty solid complement next to a player like Giannis Antetokounmpo, who obviously is at his best when the rim is open and you're able to make 3-point shots around him. Moving on to pick number 29, we have the Minnesota Timberwolves here now. What a great season they've had so far. Just have had a lot of convincing, strong wins. Their defense has been really spectacular. And I think offensively, they've got players that you can rely on. I think Karl Anthony Towns is a very good offensive player. I think Anthony Edwards is a great offensive player. I think that one thing that they're lacking is really quick decision-making connectivity. And you might ask what that means. What I mean is they need a guy who can catch the basketball, and then instantly swing it to the corner. You might say, well, they have Kyle Anderson. Kyle Anderson can't really shoot, and he's still not that quick decision maker. He's a good decision maker, but everything he does, that's why his nickname is Slow-Mo, is seemingly in slow motion. It takes him a while to read the floor, and I think a player that would fit their offense really well without sacrificing their defense in any way, and this is going to be a controversial pick because people are going to think I'm selecting him here just because of his name. 29th overall, I have the Minnesota Timberwolves selecting Bronny James out of USC, and I know people are going to say, oh my gosh, he isn't even scoring that much for the Trojans, this and the other thing. Everyone's going to freak out. I don't care about the scoring at all. There's so many players that get drafted without them having to score the basketball. Justin Edwards and Tyrese Proctor are both averaging 9 points a game. People are going to freak out in the comments about that. Bronny James is a good player. He does a lot of things. He's got really great functional athleticism for a guard. He jumps out of the gym. He's quick. He's got a good first step on both ends. He's a good defender with his first step, and he's also very useful with his first step on offense. He gets to spots on the floor. He can make decisions. He's got a good gather off the dribble. He hasn't made a ton of off the dribble shots so far, hasn't even really attempted a ton, but I think there's room for him to grow in that area as well. And honestly, he just looks the part of a good NBA player. When you watch him play, he moves right. He moves the way that you would see an NBA guard move. And I think for Minnesota, again, if you're addressing some of those needs offensively, he's quick. He has connectivity skills. He's smart. I think he has a really high IQ. I think he's a selfless player who's willing to make the right play. and it puts Minnesota in a spot where, first of all, you get a pretty big name player, which I think is always important for a market like Minnesota. Now, that's not the reason you draft the guy. You draft the guy based off of fit and talent, and I think that's warranted here with Bronny James as well. But having the name, having that kind of person here does go a long way in also helping market the team. And listen, they got new ownership. Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lowry just took over the team. So those are two important, prominent pieces as well when it comes to drafting Bronny James. Is outside of just the basketball fit, how many jerseys will they sell and how big of a name will he become in Minnesota? And I think the answer is pretty big, to be honest, and I think he fits. I think he's honestly a better Nickeil Alexander-Walker if everything goes right in his career. Like, you're looking at a kind of maybe poor man's Drew Holiday or a rich man's Nickeil Alexander-Walker. And I think with that, 29th overall, that's, in my opinion, a home run pick. If you look at the typical draft returns from the 29th overall selection, I think Bronny James would be an absolute mega home run pick here for the Timberwolves at this spot. Pick 30, we are now talking about the best team in the NBA, the Boston Celtics. I've been super impressed with them this season, and it's really no surprise. They have done a great job building their roster based on the way that the coach wants to coach. They have a ton of spacing. They're able to stretch teams out. Kristaps Porzingis has been a massive home run for them. He's just the perfect center for that team. He offers rim protection. He's grown as a passer each and every year of his career, and he's also just a lights-out shooter. And because of that, the Celtics are very difficult to beat, very tough to beat. So what could they really look to add here at 30th overall? For me, it's just more length, size, defense, and maybe some shooting upside. And the player here that I landed on was Baba Miller out of Florida State. He is from Mallorca, Spain. So he's an interesting player when it comes to his draft profile, because looking at him a year ago, I liked him quite a bit before he'd even played a college game. He's now a sophomore, and going into last draft cycle, the 2023 draft, I thought maybe, just maybe, if he has a good freshman season, he could be a lottery pick. And then he ended up having a very bad freshman season, shot about 28% from three roughly, and just struggled pretty mightily, and honestly just wasn't his self. He might have even shot below 28% from three, probably like 25% from three as a freshman. As a sophomore this year, he's shooting about 32% from three, which isn't fantastic. I'm not suggesting here that he's a great shooter. What I'm suggesting is there's been great improvement. He had a really nice summer as well, playing for Spain in some I believe U21 World Cups, and he's still young. You're looking at a guy who's only a sophomore product, and he's averaging this year 8 points a game, which is a pretty significant step forward, averaging 5 rebounds a night this year as well. So he's just taken some significant steps forward. Now he's only shooting 40% from the free throw line, so that is a massive red flag for everyone who looks at free throw shooting as an indicator of what their career is going to look like as shooters. Everyone's hitting the panic button. I don't necessarily look at that as much myself. Now, 40% is a massive concern. That is kind of a typical sign of, hey, look, this guy doesn't have very much touch. And some of those things are true, but you're still taking Baba Miller for the defensive side of the floor first and foremost. On the year, he is averaging a good number of stocks per game, with about 2 stocks per game. So again, 30th overall. If you're Boston, you're getting more length, size, shot blocking, some passing lane deterrence as well. And that's just some of the interesting components that Baba Miller has to offer. I still like Jordan Walsh a lot, who they drafted last year in the second round. So I think the Celtics are just trying to complement your existing core with young, cheap talent who can defend, and then hopefully knock down some meaningful shots when they're relied upon. And I think Baba Miller's going to be able to offer that quite a bit. I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content. Go check out the previous video right there, and go check out my suggested video right up in this one. Thanks again, guys. We really do appreciate you. Go join the Discord. Go leave a follow on Twitter. Links are in the description for that, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.